Hello, everyone. Welcome to Virtual Thursdays Dire Literary Series. My name is Timothy Gager, and tonight our feature is Lise Haines from another part of Massachusetts. And let me tell you a little bit about her. As finalist for Penn Nelson Algren Fiction Award, she's the senior writer in residence at Emerson College and a former Briggs-Copeland Lecturer at Harvard. Her stories and essays have appeared in AGNI, Ploughshares, Post Road, Crosscurrents, the Barcelona Review, and elsewhere. Haines received her undergraduate degree from the creative writing program at Syracuse and her MFA from Bennington in Vermont. She lived in Santa Barbara, California for years, and she currently lives in Boston near her daughter, who produces video games for GBH. With that, I would love to turn it over to Lise.
Well, thank you so much, Tim. And I just endlessly applaud you for the work that you do with this series. And congratulations on your new book.
Thank you so much.
I am going to read a 10-minute section from my fifth novel, Book of Knives. Nora is my narrator, and she lives in Berkeley, California. She's a documentary filmmaker who is grieving for her first husband, Takeo, the love of her life. This section is a flashback to the day when she had to put Takeo to rest in Kyoto, Japan. And I ask any Japanese speakers, including my sister, to bear with my pronunciations. I sit by the water and think of the day we buried Takeo. His family has one of the older burial sites in Kyoto, up a low hill surrounded by maple and cypress, each leaf green and healthy, as if life would go on. There will be room for me one day, his mother assured me with delicacy, when she asked if she could lay her son to rest in Japan. I had never heard Sachiko sound that frail. I couldn't recall where I had read that there's a shortage of burial sites in Japan. That's why developers put up buildings, sometimes mistaken for offices or condos, until the signage goes up. Inside, each floor is lined with tiny vaults that gradually fill with urns. In one building with a personal code punched in, panels light up in a variety of colors, and an image of Buddha retrieves the family remains. I was glad Takeo wouldn't be kept in a vending machine. I hope I didn't say that to Sachiko. She's too dear to me, but I was having trouble knowing when I said things inside or outside my body. I agreed he should be set to rest in Kyoto, and someday I would join him. As the ceremony began, my mother squeezed one of my hands. A Shinto priest officiated. I recognized the distant family members from the small trips Takeo and I had taken around Japan, though names slid in and out. Once a year, we went to Kyoto, where Sachiko, her other son Akiro, and his family live. The sons grew up in that city of temples. We always stole away to new regions during our 3 or 4 week visits. We went to Kurizawa, Nagoya, Sapporo, Osaka, to name a few, and often to Tokyo, where he indulged my curiosities. We had lunch with giant stuffed animals. We went to the top of Sky Tree, walked inside Buddha's head in Kamakura, ate at conveyor belt sushi bars. We stood in the middle of Shinjuku, bathed in neon light, and checked out the best yakitori restaurants tucked away in narrow alleys. Our favorite was back in Kyoto, and we saved this for the last day of each trip, along with Sanju Sengendo, the temple with 1,001 statues of Kannon, goddess of mercy, each statue carved of cypress and covered in gold leaf, where I had prayed for a child many times. As the priest recited his prayers, I wanted to run away to Tokyo with my husband, riding the train through the rice fields to see a view of Mount Fuji, though it's typically shrouded in fog. But I was there at Takeo's burial studying my brother-in-law's face. He was the one who had to sift through the ashes to pull out fragments of bone at the mortuary. I knew at the time that this was not occurring. I know none of this ever occurred. My dress fluttered against my legs in a sudden gust, as if I were fully present. I looked at each face like this was a casting call for a documentary no one wanted to be in. The robes of the Shinto priest billowed as he went through songs of death. His hat was kept in place with a chin tie so it wouldn't sail off and become a silk boat. Incense coiled against shafts of sunlight, and a tall white birch ached. I didn't want to think about the air that day and how turbulent it was, but I wouldn't have wanted Takeo to be buried on an ugly, calm day. Down the hill, a few hundred feet from the grave, is a temple. As I looked at it, I realized I'd been there with my husband once. It's dedicated to Marichiko, the boar god. Paper prayers danced on wooden racks, and the longer I gazed at them, I found myself there, writing out messages and wishes and tying them with red ribbon along with everyone else at the temple. And just as quick, I was looking up at myself at the gravesite, at the woman who had lost her husband. For a moment, I was in both places at once. Maybe this is the one thing I know about death now, that we leave our bodies as the dead leave theirs. The prayers stopped and my father steadied me. Some of the elderly relatives started to disperse. I had been unable to cry from the moment of my husband's death, and I had cried so hard I had turned to salt. A monk at the temple pulled a heavy beam suspended on ropes and struck the giant bell. I heard the sound, "Widow," travel up the hill to meet me. When I looked back, I saw Takeo. The air was knocked from my lungs. He stood next to Sachiko. I knew he wasn't there, and I knew he was. I mouthed the word "wait" to him. Quickly, I told my father I needed some time by myself, while Sachiko and Mom negotiated my aloneness through a series of looks. I worried that Takeo would grow impatient and leave before this was settled. I said to them quite firmly, "I'll join you in a little while." Drawing a small thermos of tea from her bag, my mother-in-law placed this in my hands. Then she started down the hill with my parents. Taking a seat on the bench, I finally turned away from them. There was no one visiting the other plots at that moment. Takeo's eyes were glassy and sleep-deprived, his hair mussed by the wind. I had wondered if he came back to me, how he would look. He loved Japanese ghost movies, but he would never want to scare me. The slash-mouthed figures are the worst, but his mouth was his mouth, and he wasn't blue or ashen or thin as film. He was just Takeo in a pair of black pants, the charcoal jacket I bought him last year, and a white shirt with no tie, as if to say he understood the occasion, but wasn't taking it too seriously. I touched the bench. "Sit with me." This drew a smile, but he stayed where he was. And I realized I couldn't move, as if fatigue had fastened me in place. The tree made that sound again, and I understood it could collapse on us. Wiping my face with my sleeve, I said, "The thing is, if you stay here in Kyoto." The sky was full of alarm at my words, and I couldn't finish my sentence. It was essential that he follow me home. I wanted him to hold me tight as binding and pour everything back inside me. But he lingered in that one spot listening, or what I imagined was listening. I have plenty of footage of him that I can watch on an infinite loop. But this will never fill in all the gaps. In time, I will forget his speech patterns when he was surprised by something, how he looked at me when he wanted to make love in the afternoon, the way he sometimes raised an eyebrow as he glazed his pots. I'll be left with a facsimile in fixed scraps of time. I wouldn't do that, he said, his voice animated. Promise. Yes, he said, I promise. This was his most serious tone. I waited until it stopped echoing against my inner ear. With his assurance, the days of little sleep began to tug at me. Rest, he said. If you stay with me, I'm here, he said. I shifted around on the bench. I removed and folded my coat and nestled it under my head. Tucking my legs up, I lay down near my husband's grave and tried to keep my eyes open. When I woke up, I was at my mother-in-law's in Takeo's old bedroom on his futon. They said I slept for 2 days and nights and was halfway into a third. I don't recall anyone carrying me, the ride back to her home, the business of getting undressed and putting on a nightgown before I dropped off. After I bathed and ate something and had a night with his family, I flew home with my parents. I held the secret of Takeo's appearance close. If I told anyone, they would say it was a dream, and my mother would remind me again of the things shock can do.
Thank you so much. That was exquisite.
Thank you.
This was a wonderful reading and lovely prose. That's from your new book, Book of Knives.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I had to throw the title in there. It's a little plug for it. So it's a wonderful book. And are you sitting in your workspace right now?
Well, this is my dining room, which is my workspace. The whole dining room, because I eat here alone, so I can dedicate a whole room to it.
Do you recommend that writers have a space, or?
I recommend that writers work wherever they can, however they can, and that they do a lot of reading.
Now, I read that you list Kyoto as one of your favorite places. So tell me the relationship with writing and you producing something with places that you love.
Okay, but let me talk for a moment about Kyoto. It has 1,600 temples, and you can be walking in an outside mall, and there is an old temple. I started meditating when I was 20, and I'm sort of a flaky Buddhist. I don't practice enough, but to go there is just, it's really hard to express how amazing it is. So the question is about travel and incorporating that, or subjects?
Travel and places and locations that you love. Does it jumpstart your writing in any way, or it's just coincidental?
Maybe a little bit of both. I think what jumpstarts me is starting to see a bit of a character, but I could start a book just based on a sentence, an image, a line of dialogue, and then I'm getting curious about what that might mean. With this particular book, it started out with a sentence, the knives go missing one by one. So then you have to say, well, what knives are those? And why are they disappearing?
Does that become the opening line of the book?
It's now the opening line to chapter 6, but it was the opening many drafts ago of the book. And I do think anytime you're able to travel, if you enjoy travel and go to some place that's fresh and new, it does kind of, it just revitalizes you, right? And you can take endless, and I love to photograph, so I just take endless photos. And I can't see clearly what I'm photographing. I use my cell phone, but I can never get my glasses on in time and try and expand the picture and stuff. So I just sort of frame it and shoot and hope it all turns out well.
Now, let's go back to that line, the knives were missing one by one.
Yes.
What were you doing when that line hit you?
Well, I want to say I was cutting up vegetables, but no, I have no idea at this point. I have no idea. In the back of my mind, I felt like I wanted to tackle a ghost story. And we were talking earlier and about the idea of suspense, and I did not set out to write something that had suspense, and I didn't set out to scare anybody, including myself, because I don't like to get scared very much. But you know, as you get to know characters, and for me, writing is about being in a state of vivid daydreaming, and I feel like I'm in that world, and then things are starting to happen. And I think once you really, really get to know your characters, you can't change them, though they are full of contradictions, but you can't force them to be one way or another. All you can do is change events or settings. But I decided with a ghost story, there's so many ghost stories out there, and I wasn't going to sit down and read them all. And then I would get all freaked out about, oh, how can I say anything original? So I decided that instead of running away from tropes, I just embrace them and set it, 25 miles out on a dirt road at this campground. There's an estate of ruin with a lake that has an endless bottom to it, and no other houses around, with this pretty mad family, which is her second husband's family. So I just went for it.
It sounds like it would make, I know that's one of your books was optioned for HBO, but it sounds like this particular one would be just a winner.
You can see that, right? Fingers crossed.
We have a question from Robert, and I don't know if it has anything to do with the book, but it have to do with Japanese culture. What is the Japanese view of death, and how does that compare to the US view of death?
Oh, I wish I could answer that. I'm not expert in Japanese life. My sister, however, when she was in high school, she started taking Japanese lessons. She speaks several languages, but every year she and her husband go to Japan. So I've managed to go on a couple of those trips. So I have a lot of impressions, but for this book, it didn't make sense to really research Japanese life. I also studied with a poet named Kenneth Rexroth, long gone, but he wrote about 100 books, and Kyoto was his favorite place. So when I knew I was going to Japan, I tracked down an old mutual friend and said, he used to talk about this temple that was dedicated to Marichiko. Do you have any idea where it is? And he sent me this old hand-drawn map that Kenneth had drawn. And my sister, she's just intrepid. She managed to find this little tiny temple. And we went, and it was great.
Now, you said that you didn't have to do much research about Japanese and Japanese culture. Which one of your books did you have to research the most?
Oh, God.
You've been at this for such a long time. It's probably hard to think back at 2002 when My Sister's Country came out.
Yeah, I mean, I do research in every book. Like this book, I did research on knives, but and you know, a little bit about documentary filmmaking. I think I'm just not sure. Oh, probably Girl in the Arena, which was my adult dark satire, which got published as a young adult. But that's about modern gladiator sport, as if gladiator sport is in current day and as big as the NFL. And so I went to Rome and I looked at sites where gladiators used to practice, and I learned that women were in the arena, and just found all of that quite fascinating.
You've been writing for a long time. In fact, your very first novel, can you tell me about your very first novel?
Well, that's In My Sister's Country, and that
No, it goes further than that. I believe that your first novel is when you were 9 years old.
oh yes. So my parents were journalists, my mom and my stepdad, and I remember the big green pads of paper, and they had I think it was a Smith Corona, and at age 9, I was sitting at the Smith Corona, you know, one key at a time, typing up a story about a novel about a cat. So yes, that was my first one. They were pretty indulgent.
So maybe go a little bit past age 9. And obviously your novel came out, and your first one in 2002. So right now, sitting back and reflecting, is this what you thought being a writer was all about?
Wow, that's interesting. I don't think that I ever said, what's the writing life, or what's a writer all about? I think any writer wishes they had more fame, more following, more money in the bank. I knew I wanted to teach. But I was thinking the other day, you know, one of my big ambitions was to write beautiful books that had a chance of enduring in this world. And there's no guarantee on the latter. But I feel like I have continued to accomplish that, knock on wood, and depending on how readers see it. But personally, I feel like I'm hitting the mark I want to hit.
Is it important to leave a legacy? I mean, it sounds that way to you, but what do you think in general for any writer? Is that the big goal?
Oh, I think every writer's different. And as a teacher, I work with students who want to write literary fiction. They want to write genre fiction. They just go off in so many different directions, and the impetus is so different. For me, every word counts. And I'll just rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. The minute I have the first sentence out, I'm rewriting.
What I noticed about all of your books are very real and very real world, but they have these remarkable twists to them. So at what point in your process does the twist hit? Like you're writing real. Is the twist right away? Are you thinking how it's going to twist right away when you start, or is it just kind of happen?
So again, I don't think that, it just sort of happens. I don't plot anything out. I don't know from chapter to chapter what I'm going to do. But I have always been fascinated with that border between the real and the unreal. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, we all spend a certain amount of time in that boundary. When we lose people, when someone gives birth, how is that possible? This little creature comes along. When we go through major experiences, or just to think that we aren't even the size of a speck in the big world, in the big universe. It's so hard to take in. And I think all of those things push us a little past the tangible and the things that we know and count on.
What you just said, I thought you succeeded remarkably in your book, When We Disappear, because I think like everybody's fear is to disappear, is it not?
Everyone's what?
Irrelevant. Biggest fear is to be irrelevant, to disappear, have other things disappear around them.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, that was spooky because I'm halfway through writing this book about a girl who was 9, and she was with her father when this horrific car accident happened, and it became a hit and run. And about halfway through, I realized that my biological father, and you can tell how I felt about him by that title, had told me once when I was young that he hit a man in his car and the man flew up into his windshield. I have no idea what happened to the man. And, but my biological dad had this smile on his face and told me he had bribed the judge to get off the case. And I thought maybe that was in the back of my mind when I set out to write that story.
That's an amazing story, and coincidental and really poignant. Tell me what it's like to be the senior writer in residence at Emerson.
Well, I'm not the only one here. If you see William Oram is here, I don't know if anyone else is, but he has that same role. And it means we work our tails off. We teach a 3-3 load. We do advising, committee work, events for new students. I mean, all sorts of stuff. And how we get anything done, any of our own work done, I can't even figure it all out, but somehow we get through. And William is just a remarkable writer. I hope that you look at his work too.
I will, now that I have a recommendation, and that's great. Thank you for being here, William. And Lise, thank you so much for being here with us and answering questions. That was a remarkable interview and reading that you put on.
Thank you. I'm just happy to be here.
And for folks that are interested, here is the Book of Knives, and it's not coming October 2022. It's already out. And for her other books, it's kind of like, here's the book Speedway. As we talked about most of these, so check them all out. Don't stop at one. And it's just really good to see you again and to talk to you.
Thank you so much, and again, congratulations on your new book.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
I am now going to cut off the live stream on Facebook. If you're out there enjoying it, that's great. If you have something to read at the open mic, please, you can use the link and I will let you in. You know, there's no such thing as being late. You've already watched the wonderful reading. So thanks for watching the stream.